Okay.
Over to you, Claude.
All righty. I'm just seeing if this is working. What did you say about freezing? Oh, there we go. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome, especially to our Wakkerstrom friends. I hope you can hear me. I came home last night after a wonderful 3 weeks down in Wakkies, and when I'm finished teaching up here, then I'm going to go back down. So I thought, being so cold, that to talk about birds, bergs, and bears would probably be quite appropriate. So when I say to people, I'm talking about Svalbard, people go, where is that? And we're now talking the high Arctic. So let me get my little pointer back, if it will let me. We've got Norway over here, and pretty much directly north of Norway, there's the small archipelago of islands called Svalbard, or it was previously called Spitsbergen. And so I'm going to talk about Svalbard and then a little bit of the east coast of Greenland, which is for sure one of my favorite areas. So if you want to go and see polar bears in the natural habitat, this is pretty much the place to go. And on the way, we stop off at a place called Bear Island. So Bear Island's about halfway between north of Norway and Svalbard. And it's really just a small little rock in the middle of nowhere, but it has the most amazing bird cliffs. And in fact, National Geographic has voted it as one of the top 100 places to visit. However, it's really not very easy to get to. You can pretty much only get there if you're on a ship on your way up to Svalbard. Now, it looks pretty desolate. Whenever we go there, it's in this band of fog. So it's often very, very foggy, but you've got these very craggy mountain faces, or cliff faces rather, and it's wall to wall with guillemots. And this is the one place where you find the bridled guillemot or spectacled guillemot, and it's just a different morph, which has this beautiful white around the eye. Now, I'll talk about these a little bit later on, but they always nest right on these cliff faces. The other birds that we see in this area are your Atlantic puffin, which I know everybody loves, and they tend to nest in the small little crevices in the rock face. So I love this photo. It's one of my favorites. Often once they've washed themselves, they'll stick their wings up and flap them around. And they've always got these very worried looks on their faces. Now, the bill of the puffins shed. So this very colorful bill sheds in non-breeding time, and then it just becomes a plain gray sort of horn color. So obviously we're there in summer because winter, one, it's dark, and two, it's colder than normal. So we get to see them in full breeding plumage. This is such an amazing place, and it's got all of these arches, some of which we can drive through. And I don't normally have photographs of myself, but this is one where there's quite this narrow tunnel, and we love to drive through it. It's quite a challenge because you've got water coming from all sides, and you don't quite know which way you're going to get washed around. But it's in a little zodiac. It's a super cool thing to do. So this is the one entrance to it, and you can see all the birds flying around. These are all your black-legged kittiwakes, and that's going through the tunnel. But this gives you an idea of how many birds are in this, just around this island. When we take the zodiacs, the little rubber boats out, and the sky is just black with birds. But they're all nesting on the sheer cliff face. And that's really because they need to nest in a place where there aren't predators, or it's very difficult to get for predators to get to them. And the guillemots in particular don't really have nests. They hold the egg between themselves and the cliff face, right on these tiny little ledges. So and there's no personal space. You can't have a personal space issue if you're a guillemot, because you just wouldn't survive. Then moving up from Bear Island, we're now coming up into Svalbard, to the southern part of Svalbard, and this is the typical landscape, the typical scenery that we have. So there are these sharp glacier ground out mountains, and that all comes down to pretty large glaciers. Unfortunately, and we're seeing this a lot with climate change, the glaciers are receding at an astronomical rate. In some of the glaciers, well over a meter a day. So that's 360 meters a year. In some cases, even more. So I've noticed in the years going there that the glaciers have really receded, because we know the glaciers very well, but also they've shrunk in size. So they used to be much higher than they are now. Here we can see one of the glaciers. It's moved right back now. So there almost isn't a tongue going into the water anymore. But it's still very, very beautiful. Earlier on in the season, there's a lot more snow, but then as summer starts to wear on, the snow will melt, and you have this dark chocolate brown soil underneath it. One of my favorite places is actually very similar to Bear Island, is a place called Alkafeliet. And this is a bird colony with 60,000 pairs of Brunix guillemots. And the same as Bear Island, again, when you come there, we do a Zodiac cruise. So we take our guests out on the Zodiacs, and we go up really at eye level with these birds. Well, they're a lot higher than us. And the sky is just black with birds. You can smell them, you can hear them. It's like a full sensory experience. This is Alkafeliet on a really clear day with a beautiful, beautiful blue sky. Not a lot of snow there. Often it's also very, very cloudy. And here's a pair of Brunix guillemots with a little chick. Now, this chick is probably he's a few weeks old. And you can see that they keep the chick between themselves and the rock face. But they can't do that for particularly long, because eventually the chick's going to just get too big. Now, if you're having your chicks on or eggs on a rock face like this, you need to have eggs that are pear-shaped. So they're pointed at one end and much round on the other, so that if the parent has to fly away for whatever reason, the egg, this is the theory, is going to roll in a circle rather than just roll off the cliff face. However, that really happens a lot more when once the embryo has started to develop a little bit more, and the bigger side is a little bit heavier. And when the chick gets to about 1/3 the size of the adult, he takes this ginormous leap of faith, and he jumps off the cliff face into the water. So he can't fly. His feathers aren't fully developed yet, but there's simply not enough space. So this is one where he's jumped off, and they're joined then by the father. The male will join the chick, and they will then start swimming south for about 1,000 kilometers to their wintering grounds. because the chick can't fly, they have to paddle basically, and the male will go and feed, go and catch food and bring it up, feed the chick, and the female will basically go on a bit of a holiday and meet them a bit later. Now let me just see if this is going to work. Here we go. So here's a little snippet just to show you this incredible leap of faith. Looking down on the little chick, and the chick will start to flap its wings like that. You can see he's getting ready. Tells his dad he's going to go, and he goes flying off. Dad goes, wait! And basically, they don't even really land. They just bounce on the water. You'll see as he comes in. They sort of bounce a few times. It's amazing that they don't injure themselves a bit more. You can see how they bounce down, and the adult will then join the chick and take them off. Now they only have one chick because it's they're quite long-lived birds, and there isn't space for them to raise two chicks. So they generally, well, not generally, they will only have one chick. Now, one of the reasons that birds up in the north have maintained the ability to fly, unlike penguins down in the south, is because they have terrestrial predators. So they've got to be able to fly to nest on these sheer cliff faces, and but even then, your Arctic foxes tend to be the best hunters in these sorts of environments. If you looked at the morphology of your guillemot, they look very much like penguins. So the feet are very low down on the body. They swim underwater. They almost fly underwater, chasing the food that they go after, mainly sort of fish, small fish and squid. And they can dive down to 200 or 300 meters. So they can dive very, very, very deep. So they can be under the water for a long time. But as I say, they've had to be able to fly. They're really not good flyers. So they don't generally want to fly at a very long distance. Their flight is more underwater. So these areas, this is in Alkafeliet, are really prime hotspots for seeing the Arctic fox. Now, this is an Arctic fox in his winter coat. I always want to say his winter plumage. So he's in the white coat. Normally, here's another one that's also in a white coat. Normally in summer, however, they are in what they call a mink coat, which isn't mink at all to do with the animal. It's more the color. Here, these two are busy playing up on the slopes. But this is a mink or a blue coat of an Arctic fox. So generally, the winter coat is white, obviously, because they want to be camouflaged in the snow, and the brown is in summer, so they're then camouflaged against a darker background. And we were watching them. They're so fast, grabbing chicks or even adults. Quite amazing. So what we generally do is we obviously on a small ship. The ships that I work on generally have about 130 passengers, and we take little Zodiacs and we run people ashore. And from there, we lead walks. We go and have a look at the geology or the plants, or if we're in the Antarctic, down south, we'll go to penguin colonies. In the north, it's a bit more dangerous. Well, it's a lot more dangerous because, of course, we've always got the threat of bears. And a polar bear can move very, very fast on land. So we all carry rifles. We always have a perimeter. You can, in fact, see over here, we've got someone patrolling or just keeping an eye out. So different areas, we've got people watching the whole time just to make sure that bears aren't in the area. There's more paperwork for us if we shoot a bear than if we shoot a person. So we always say we'd rather shoot our passengers than shoot a polar bear. But the reality is that we don't want to ever be in a position where we have to shoot a bear. Barnacle geese, we have, just like we've got here, our Egyptian geese, the barnacle geese are prolific breeders, and they spend their summers way up north, very far north, up in Svalbard, some of Greenland, and northern parts of Russia. So we don't actually, believe it or not, see them that often. But I was at one particular site, the 14th of July glacier, and I had this little flock of barnacle geese walking past, and they were super cute. And they then migrate down to the Faroe Islands and some parts of the UK, Iceland, Greenland, in the winter months. This is 14th of July glacier. And it's the typical sort of scene that we have. Now, in front of the glaciers, we often will have massive flocks of kittiwakes. And the reason for this, I think, is because there's a lot of water, believe it or not, coming underneath the glacier, between the glacier and the bedrock. And it creates quite a bit of upwelling right close to the face of the glacier. And the other bird that we have in this area is your Arctic tern. And your Arctic tern, as some of you may know, he's really the world champion in migrants. He will migrate from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back again. So he sees the most sunlight of any animal, and it's really quite a remarkable journey. And what people don't think about is that his journey is actually followed by skuas, and I'll talk about skuas a little later, because he does all the fishing, and the skuas then go and steal it from them. This is just a general day for us. We were doing a bit of scouting around, looking to see what we could find. Often we'll have seals, bearded seals, on these ice floes, looking for whatever birds we can find, or possibly if there's some bears in the vicinity. This is now very far north, and I'm hoping that this is going to work. This is the Monaco Breen Glacier. It's at about 80 degrees north. And this is one of those glaciers. It's really receding. This is one of the massive carvings that we encounter. This particular carving went on for about 5 minutes. I've taken just a snippet, about a minute and a half, just to give you an idea of the tremendous impact of these massive carvings. So bear in mind that 1 cubic meter of ice weighs nearly a ton. It weighs 900 kilograms. So we're just seeing hundreds of tons of ice breaking off the glacier. And it just went on and on. Really quite spectacular. So when we're out on the boats close to glaciers, we will always keep at least 400 meters away from the glaciers. There's not very much in the way of settlements in Svalbard. There's the main town of Longyearbyen. There are a couple of little mining villages. And then further up north at 78 degrees north, there's this little research village called Nyalesund. And it's areas like this where we can get our little snow bunting. So he's the most northerly songbird. He lives his entire life north of the Arctic Circle, although they do migrate a little bit further south, but they will nest and raise their chicks in Svalbard and then go south down to Norway for their winter season. Also, this is a female. The male is far whiter, and they just really blend in. It's very difficult to see them. So this is, as I say, the most northerly songbird. Nyalesund is also where Roald Amundsen took off from when he went over the North Pole. And many people say that he was, in fact, the first person effectively to get to the North Pole, because the others who had proclaimed to get there before were proved to be liars. But he didn't actually land. He just went in his air balloon. Along the shores in these areas, we have one of the most common waders is your purple sandpiper. And I'm still trying to figure out what part of him is purple, because I see orange, I see greenish, I see brown, I see white, but I don't see purple anyway. But they will normally be gleaning insects off the kelp or the seaweed that we find along the edges, particularly these more stony edges of in Svalbard. These are some of the cutest little birds. These are your dovekies or your little auks, and they're really quite tiny. They're a little bit bigger than a sparrow, and they eat very small phytoplankton or zooplankton, and they don't really have a crop. They've got a gular pouch, so they've got this small little pouch at the bottom of the throat there, and they fill that up, and that's they will then take that up to where their chicks are, and they'll nest in these not quite cliff faces, but scree slopes where there's lots of small little hidey holes. And they found that in areas close to dovekey colonies, the water is incredibly nutrient rich from all the guano, that there's normally quite a lot of food in that area as well. So it's a bit of a feedback mechanism. We don't really like to see bears on land. Bears should be on ice. But we came across a walrus carcass that had attracted a whole lot of bears. And this was quite an amazing one to see. And the second trip we did in the same area, the carcass still hadn't been finished. It was still there, and bears were still feasting off it. Here we have a mother and two cubs. It's quite difficult to see. You can certainly see how full they are. Their bellies are definitely quite full over there. But it's always interesting to watch the interactions, because here they're busy feasting away, and you can see one of them is looking over his shoulder, and that's because there was another bear, a female bear, also wanting a little bit of the food, but keeping a distance for the moment. And eventually she can't hold it any longer, so she comes up and tries to get into the close to the carcass, and the three of them gang up on her and effectively fight her off. So that in the end, she then lies down and figures that it's probably safer just to wait for them to finish feeding, and then she'll have a go at getting into the carcass. Svalbard an amazing place geologically. It's very, very old, but it's also got different parts of it illustrate different parts of global history or geology, really. So there's a lot of metamorphic rock, there's a lot of igneous rock, and there's a lot of this sort of sedimentary rock that you can see here. Of course, one of the other animals that we all come to see are the walrus, and walrus numbers are really down, so they're very, very low. And when we're in zodiacs, we don't want to disturb walrus at all. They can get disturbed very easily. But those tusks are incredibly dangerous. So one of my colleagues managed to, he was just floating around in a walrus. There were walrus in the water around him, and one went and pierced his zodiac, so punctured it and had sent him back home. So we have to be very careful of them. They are remarkably dangerous. Now, the walrus are just such incredible animals. They will use the tusks almost as sleds on the seafloor, and they'll normally feed less than 30 meters underwater. And they've got this ability to suck. Very few animals can suck, but the walrus can actually suck a clam right out of its shell. So they've got quite prehensile lips, and they'll blow into this. They'll run their tusks along the ground, and as they're doing that, they blow into the substrate until they can find the clams that they like, and then they'll suck them and basically suck the clam right out. The other thing that's super interesting about the walrus is that they are negatively buoyant, which basically means they're not buoyant at all, they sink, and which is quite good if you're having to feed on the surface, at least on the sea floor. But then when you want to come up to the surface and you're quite bulky, up to like a ton, then you don't want to use any energy. So they've got a pouch around the neck, a pharyngeal pouch, which they breathe air into, and it works almost like as a BC when you go diving. So if they're up at the surface, they can keep this pouch inflated, and it helps them just bob around at the surface without them using any energy. They also have the biggest penis bone relative to size, I know this is really important, of any animal. So it's about 30 centimeters, and I always use this as just a bit of trivia, because I'm sure this is the sort of thing you want to bandy around at a dinner party. And so I was telling some guests about this on the one Zodiac cruise, and the one guest said to me, "Well, do they keep it inside?" So I say, well, mostly, but if there's a very strong current, then they'll dig it into the bottom of the seafloor to hold them there. And they went, "Oh," but unfortunately, I'm a very bad liar, so I couldn't keep a straight face for very long before telling them that no, actually, of course, they did keep it inside. You'll see that they've got very, very thick skin, particularly around the neck, and here you can see the scars from fighting. The males have much longer tusks, and they do use it for sort of territorial battles. You can sort of see the big lumps in the neck. That's just really to protect them. Then as we move further north, we go right up into the sea ice. So when I first started going up to the Arctic in 2007 approximately, we had to go probably up to about 81 degrees north to get to sea ice. Now we're going well beyond 82 degrees north. So quite a few 100 miles further north, just to try and find some ice. Not even very thick sea ice, just any ice. And this is, for me, it's one of the most magical places to go, is to go right into that sea ice. And this is my favorite bird of all, and you're going to see a lot of it, and that's the ivory gull. And the ivory gull lives north of the Arctic Circle, lives in the Arctic all its throughout the year. They don't migrate south. What we see here is, this is a juvenile.
It's been horribly cold.
Yeah, very, very, very cold.
-5 tomorrow morning.
And you can see that it's a juvenile. It still has the flecks on the wings, whereas the adult is pure white. So here you go. They've
had one or two, I know, as well.
They've got greenish legs, and a yellow bill. Up north, the closest that we get to the albatross are your northern fulmar, which is very similar to our southern fulmar, and they part of the tube nose family. There you can see there's that tube nose, and they have an incredible sense of smell. So they will feed mainly on little zooplankton, small little organisms in the water, and they can smell gases given off by the algae. As it gets eaten by the zooplankton, it releases dimethyl sulfide, and these birds can smell the dimethyl sulfide from many, many kilometers away, so that they know where their food is. We're talking about the kittiwakes, and kittiwakes, they sort of have the apartments. They don't nest quite so close together as the guillemots, and they'll have one, sometimes two little chicks. So this is one of the youngsters. Your black-legged kittiwake is also a gull. It's a small gull, and they really are, I think, quite beautiful. They, however, are often the target of the bigger gulls. This is a glaucous gull, which they're pretty huge. They can weigh up to, I think, 3 kilograms, and I've seen them kill an adult kittiwake without any problem. So very, very aggressive. However, the true sort of predatory bird in the area are the skuas. And this is a very interesting skua. It's a Pomeran skua. So you can see its tail is like twisted, it's spatulate. And they will go chasing after any bird that's caught anything. Here's a Pomeran skua chasing after a kittiwake. So what'll happen is the kittiwake or the Arctic tern, they follow Arctic terns as well, will go and catch something, and these guys will harass them until eventually the bird drops whatever it's caught, and these guys will swoop underneath, catch the fish as it gets dropped, and has a free meal. So really they are the pirates of the Arctic. This is your glaucous gull. He's what we call a 4-year gull. So it takes 4 years before he reaches maturity. And so they're very, very large gulls. There's your little black-legged kittiwake, much, much smaller. Here's an Arctic tern, not Arctic tern, sorry, Arctic skua. And he's done exactly what I was just talking about. So the kittiwake had caught a fish, and he bombed and harassed the kittiwake until the kittiwake dropped the fish, and he then swept under and grabbed it. So they really are quite cheeky birds. Your Arctic tern are incredibly aggressive for tiny little birds. I've seen them mob polar bears, and really interesting story with them is they will often your phalaropes will nest close to them, because the Arctic tern then ends up being the sort of the security guards. Anything that comes close to the Arctic tern's nest or the phalarope's nest gets bombed by the Arctic tern. So if we go too close to their nests, because you can't see the chicks, they're so well camouflaged, you can't see the chicks or the eggs. You go anywhere close to its nest and you start getting mobbed. And then one of the cutest is the black guillemots, who have these incredibly red feet. We don't see that much of them. Up in the ice, of course, that's where we want to see our polar bears. And remember that polar bears are marine mammals. They're not terrestrial mammals. So they live effectively on the ice. And we're seeing them a lot more, obviously, in the water, jumping from ice floe to ice floe, often having to swim quite big distances to get to the next piece of ice. So all of this stuff that you hear about ice breaking up, it is true. This was one of the most amazing encounters I've had, and that was this was in 2019. We'd taken the ship into the ice, and we saw a bear in the distance. So we stopped the ship, and we were just watching it, and it came towards us, and it hopped over some ice. It got in some water, and what you see on this side here, that's the edge of the ship. So he came right up to the ship, and he started looking into all the portholes. He then came right up next to the ship, and I took this photo with a wide angle lens. He would look straight up at me, and I was on deck 4. He was probably a couple of meters away. He then went round to the back of the ship and tried to actually climb into the mooring deck through the mooring holes, but fortunately he couldn't get up there. I don't know if any of you have any ideas what this is, but we were super, super fortunate to see a blue whale. And blue whales are incredibly rare. They're about 5,000. They estimate about 5,000 left in the world. All you see from a distance is this massive plume. It goes up like 10 meters, 3 stories high. But you don't see a lot of the animal, even though this animal is so enormous. I mean, it's well over 30 meters long. But it's got this typical grayishy blue speckled appearance and this tiny little dorsal fin. And what you see with I'll go back there, what you see with a blue whale is you see the front part first, and from sort of the blowhole, and it just keeps going, and it goes and goes and goes until you get the dorsal fin, and they very, very seldom show their fluke. So this is what we'll see from a distance, and that's what we call the footprint of a whale. So that's where they've blowed out, and there's normally a bit of a greasy layer around them. What I did from a blue whale that I saw in close to Sri Lanka a few years ago was I took a whole bunch of photos as it was diving, and then I made a composite of them. And this is sort of how long the animal is from its blowhole over there to the dorsal fin over there. Doesn't look that amazing, but it is incredibly long. We just don't see half of it under the water. Moving then from Svalbard to East Greenland, and we go into a place here called Scoresby, which is really one of the most amazing places on the planet. While we're just looking at the map here, I want to just point something out, and this is Iceland, and obviously that's Greenland, but have a look at the line of latitude. You'll see that a large part of Greenland, southern Greenland, is in fact further south than Iceland. So most people think that Greenland is incredibly far north. Yes, it is, but a lot of it is actually quite warm. Scoresbysund goes about 240 nautical miles into the Greenland ice sheet. And so the Greenland ice sheet is just pumping out enormous quantities of these huge icebergs into this very narrow channel, well, pretty narrow channel. Now, the first time I went there was quite a few years ago. I spoke to my boss of IATA at the time, and who had been there, and I said, what can I expect? And she said to me, Scoresbysund is like driving through or sailing through a geography textbook. And it was geologically and from a landscape point of view, it is just absolutely breathtaking. Here we get icebergs of the same sort of size as we would get in Antarctica. The small little icebergs we get in Svalbard really are paled into insignificance. Here we've got these icebergs that are at least 20, 30 meters high. And of course, when you've got an iceberg 20, 30 meters high, that's only 1/10 of the whole iceberg. So you can just imagine how much ice is underneath it. And the formations are simply just indescribable. This particular, we went on a Zodiac cruise around these icebergs, and it was about 10:30 at night. So it gives you an idea. It was still very, very light. And there's the little Zodiac over there, just to give a bit of scale. And this is a place called Red Bay. And you can see why it's called that, with this incredible red rock. And wherever you go, it changes. So each little inlet changes. Now, effectively, this is just one incredible fjord. And this part of Greenland is at least 3.2 billion years old. So the geology is that old. And we're sailing through these fjords, and I'm looking at the sea chart, and the mountain that was next to us was nearly 2 kilometers straight up from the water. So really just remarkable. Absolutely just quite something else. And I am a sucker for icebergs, I'm afraid. I have lots and lots of photos of icebergs. There's really only one village there, a little village called Itakaturmit, which is fairly culturally intact. But of course, they are getting, they get a lot of supplies in, but they do go out and they go hunting whales. And unfortunately, most of the whale meat just goes to feed the dogs. So the one time I went there, they had just killed 27 narwhal. Now, I've never seen a narwhal in my life, and I was distraught. And they used the meat to feed the dogs. But it's a pretty tough existence. This just gives you some idea of some of the landscapes in Greenland, and some of the incredible icebergs. Where you see this dimpling in the icebergs, this is all from where the iceberg was underwater, so it's turned around. And what happens is, as the iceberg starts to melt, its meltwater is obviously fresh water, and the surrounding seawater being a lot saltier, the two don't mix very well. So it means that you get sort of differential melting, giving you this sort of pock marks. This is quite an interesting one. Here you can see that line over there is where the glacier had a crack, and meltwater went into that crack, and that then froze. So that's that line there. I always say that you can, if you know what to look for, you can tell the life history of an iceberg. And this particular iceberg has a few water lines. So what happens is the iceberg will melt, the weighting will shift, then a new water line will be created, then a bit more will melt or break off, and then it'll shift again. So this face here has recently broken off. You can see that it's quite jagged. But these are the different water lines. So some part of the iceberg would have broken off, and then it would have shifted, creating a new waterline. I don't know if you noticed the little zodiac over there, just to give you an idea of the size of these massive icebergs. This one was really cool as well. You can see these lines here. These are also the same meltwater channels in the ice where the fresh water has then remelted. Here's an iceberg where you can see this is the part on the top, the 10%, and all of that under there would have been the 90%, and part of it would have broken off, and now it's tipped over onto its side. The Greenlandic dogs are super cute, especially when they're puppies, but then as they get older, they are considered to be working dogs. You don't talk to them, they chain them up. But certainly as puppies, they're super cute. This, in fact, was at a village called Sakak, which was also very far north, but more on the western side. And this is their traditional Greenlandic costume. So he's wearing polar bear skin trousers, sealskin boots, and then sort of a woolen or linen top. Also very colorful. And this is in Kangalussuaq, which is also on the western side. We had just we did a disembarkation by Zodiac, and the water is this milky blue color, and that's from all the silt that comes from as the glacier water contains a lot of crushed up silt and turns it blue. And I was the last boat out, and this incredible rainbow came over. So the photographer took a photo of me as I'm driving through the rainbow, which was pretty cool. And Greenland is where we get to see the aurora, and it's for me, one of the highlights of going up to the Arctic is to see the aurora. And it's shifted quite a bit. So what happens is the Earth is sending, at least the sun is sending out a lot of energy, and that energy hits the Earth's ionosphere, and it effectively the ionosphere shields the Earth. And it sort of goes, so the solar energy goes around the Earth, and it creates almost a donut shape around the magnetic poles. And the magnetic polar north at the moment is about over there. So the best place at the moment actually is, if you want to see the aurora, is Reykjavik. It's quite an easy place to get to. So, but you need to have a clear sky. So every night, we were in that part of Greenland. And of course, we couldn't even think about it in Svalbard, because Svalbard, we were 24 hours of sun. So the quality of light at 2 o'clock in the morning is the same as 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Although often it's overcast and gray, but it's just as light. When we were now going into September, we didn't have light all the time. We started getting nighttime, and so we would be looking for the probability of seeing an aurora, and we did indeed get to see it a few times. And I always think to myself, there should be a sound associated with it, but there's not. And you just have this almost like curtains of light crossing the sky. It's quite remarkable. Most of the colors are green, but basically this energy that's coming from the sun causes nitrogen and oxygen particles to vibrate at a certain frequency, and that is what causes the colors in the aurora. I think the nitrogen is the green, but you get greens and reds and almost blues and purples, and it'll be strong, and then it'll weaken again. So it's a real problem when there's the aurora, because you're busy the whole day, and then you'll stay up until about midnight to see if there's an aurora, and often there will be, and that's perfect. But sometimes the bridge staff will radio and say, "Oh, we've got aurora at 2:00 in the morning." And well, you get out of bed and you put on all your clothes and you go out and hope that the aurora is waiting for you. Sometimes it's very weak, sometimes it only lasts for a short period of time. And I must say that some of the coldest times I've been has been when there has been an aurora, because of course the sky is absolutely clear, all the heat is being lost, but it is just it really is breathtaking. These shots I normally use a 3 or 4 second exposure. So unfortunately, as the ship is moving, all these little white dots that you see, those are stars. So you can see if they're moving, or if there's a little line that the ship has moved. But that just gives you an idea of what the aurora is like. Still in Greenland, it's just amazing. We went to this one landing site, which I'd never been to before, and the sedimentary rocks had basically been ground out, and the glaciers had smoothed it over, and you can see how the rock has metamorphosed in these areas, and then how it's been smoothed with the ice going over it. And you can in fact see the sort of striations, these lines caused by glacial movement over the rocks, and how it's really just exposed what would have been layer upon layer of other rock. And while I was at this particular site, I was a part of the time I was on polar bear duty, so I was out in the one corner, and I was breaking rocks open, because a lot of these were sedimentary rocks, and I found an amazing fossil of a coral, and I took some photos, and unfortunately I couldn't find the photos for this presentation, and I wrote to one of the paleontologists who works up in the area, and he was very, very excited, and he said, "Well, did you keep it?" I said, "No, we don't do that. You know, we'll take a photo and we leave it where it is." But I was pretty chuffed with that. It's really an amazing area that nobody gets to. Maybe 2 ships. I don't even know if there was another ship in 2019 that went to this particular area. When we're having clear skies, you have also just amazing sunsets. And the one night we had the moon rising on the one side, right over, I don't know if I've got the photo here, no, over these big icebergs. Oh, it was just really quite something. So that's a very quick whirlwind trip around 2 of my favorite areas, Svalbard and Greenland. And if you ever get a chance to go to Greenland, then I really recommend you go to East Greenland. It is just really something quite remarkable. And with that, I would like to say thank you very much. And I will hand over back to Linda, if I can get this out.